Hello, loves. Hello, hello. Hills here with a cosmic current forecast for Chiron in Taurus and the June solstice. So let's dive straight into the current today. On the 19th of June, the 20th for some, but in the US, on the 19th of June, the wounded healer, Chiron the centaur, is making its first shift into the sign of the bull, into the sign of Taurus, in near about 50 years. Every 50 years or so, we experience what's known as the Chiron return. So if you happen in your natal chart to have Chiron at about 0 degrees of Taurus, this is going to be quite impactful for you. You are entering your Chiron return. Now, Chiron is only going to stay at the 0 degree of Taurus through what in the Northern Hemisphere we call the summer, and then will come back in to finish up the work at the end degrees of Aries. So for the next year, 9 months or so in particular, what we're going to be experiencing is a bit of a wobble where we're starting to step or gallop, in Chiron's case, into the new energy of our collective experience of the wound is where the gift is, being in Taurus, shifting out of the deep self self-structuring experience of Chiron and Aries. We're going to bring in the dates real quick so that we can start to feel and touch into how this is going to move, and then we'll talk about what the energetic of Chiron and Taurus is and what the energetic of Chiron and Aries is. So on the 19th of June or the 20th, Chiron will shift into the 0 point of Taurus. Now, on the 3rd of August, with the sun in Leo, Chiron will shift retrograde, start spinning back towards Aries, which it will re-enter on the 17th of September, just before the sun moves from Virgo into Libra. It will not shift direct again until 2027, June 6th in particular. And then in April 14th of 2027, Chiron will shift into, return to the 0 of Taurus, and there it will remain in the sign of Taurus all the way through 2033, and then it'll start its wobble between Taurus and Gemini between 2033 and 34. So we're coming into a shift that is both a long time coming. Chiron has been in Aries since about the turn of the century, a little later on. But we've been moving with this energy since, probably about 2012, I think is around the time. I forgot to look up the exact date of Chiron's journey into Aries. As we've been navigating Chiron and Aries, and as we continue to through the retrograding and finishing up this year and into the beginning part of 2027, the wound there that we have been navigating is around the sense of self. And if you felt this upsurge of self-empowerment that has been running in the current since we entered this new millennium, you're starting to understand, starting to feel upsurge of spiritualism, which is the Chiron in Pisces that we finished up as we moved into Chiron and Aries. And for those of us who have Chiron and Aries, we will understand that the wound of abandonment, that we will be left out to freeze, to starve, we will be exiled if we allow ourselves to go against the grain, if we do the thing that we're called to do in the unique way that we're called to do it, something disastrous may happen. Now, that's the wound, right? That's the shadow. And as we move through the years of Chiron and Aries, as we explore and as we come into that thing that is called the Chiron return, our job is to explore that wound and to come into a reckoning of sorts, to begin to understand that all of the pain of that wound is actually from trying to exist in it without, in the shadow of it, without actually gathering the light within it. So as we collectively, and those of us who have Chiron and Aries, as we collectively have moved through this cycle, we have been moving through the shadow of disempowerment, coming into the light of embodied power, of our divine right, our divine birthright. Now, when we get to Chiron and Taurus, which is the cycle we're about to begin, what we are collectively, and for those of you who have Chiron in Taurus, what we are collectively experiencing is that wound of embodiment. The Chiron and Taurus wound is very connected to the pain, the struggle of physical embodiment. And here we'll talk a little bit about Chiron's story. Chiron, the wounded healer, is a centaur. And one of the ways in which Chiron was wounded, there are multiple. One of the ways in which Chiron was wounded was that he was struck with a poison arrow in the immortal, godlike part of his body, his leg. He could not die from the poison, yet he also could not heal the poison. It was always there in him. And he went through all of these healing modalities. He searched high and low, and he became one of the most powerful teachers of healing modalities in all of the godly and all of the earthly planes, because he gathered all this wisdom, trying to heal himself, and then shared it. It's like, this could not heal this wound, but it can, I learned, heal this one. It can help us to transmute. Now, when we feel into that duality of half God, half man, half immortal being, half mortal being, and the pain. Now, it's interesting, right? The pain wasn't in the mortal part of Chiron. It was in the immortal part of Chiron. The pain of physical embodiment. Now, any of us who are star seeds can also often relate to this, that feeling at home in a human body isn't necessarily quite so natural for us. The aches and pains of being in a human body, not just physical, but emotional, mental, spiritual as well. That longing for belonging. And here's where the wobble between Chiron and Taurus and Chiron and Aries is so loud. That wobble where whole self is becoming embodied and we feel isolated. This sense of longing for the way that we used to be able to communicate with our fellow humans, where so many of them don't seem to understand us anymore. And that splitting of the timelines, the two Earths that so many are talking about, this is part of that experience. This Chiron in Taurus is part of that experience. The wound can be a pleasure-seeking shadow, where the pains of being incarnate are so strong that you try and distract using various substances, whether it's food or alcohol or drugs or what have you. We can become addicted to just about anything when we're in these human forms, including shadow work, including our spiritual practices. Sharing love is a very big part of Chiron in Taurus. The light side is the unconditional, that free giving and receiving of love. The shadow being using some physical expression, the Jewish mother sort of thing, that stereotypical, oh, eat something. It could also be an Italian mother, right? Eat something, you look so thin. But there's a disconnect between the plying on of food or gifts and the actual love. It's like a creating of a barrier between the actual giving of love. Part of what we will collectively be working with as we move into this Chiron and Taurus is releasing the barrier between ourselves and love. So when we feel into timeline shifts, the earth split, when we feel into coming into greater connection with our divinity, what we are really talking about is coming into a greater relationship with love, and also the more free expression of releasing old walls and dogmas associated with what it means to be in a conversation with God, what it means to share love, to be in love, to be a vessel of love. So from June 19th, 2026 through September 16th or so, 2026, we get to start playing in this field. We'll tip back into Aries so that as we've been playing in this field, when we feel ourselves coming out of self in this, we can explore what knocked us out of balance. So that when in April of 2027, we officially move into Chiron and Taurus and into this powerful year of 2027 that is quite transformative. We'll just say that for now. We have the tools inlaid to keep our individualization while we bring more of that divine expression, while we play with our divinity even more. Part of this earth school has to do with this individualization. Each one of us holding a note, a frequency, a chord that as we merge more wholly with the divine, with the source, through that individualization, through that capacity to hold our structure in union with the divine expands, the source expands. The grand tapestry of the universe gets more detailed. The pictures start to emerge, we could say. Now, the sign of Taurus is very embodied, it's very manifestation. And so, while we're playing with this energy, we're also playing with that. Now, remember, Venus rules Taurus. Venus rules Taurus. So, that experience of magnetism is part of this, that allurement. So what we're really doing is calling in more of our divine love into our physical embodiment. That is really the gift within the wound of Chiron and Taurus. We're really playing with it. Now, there's another aspect that's happening in July that feels very yummy in all of this, and we'll talk more about it. But it's this thing called Barbalt's basket, and it's an alignment. It's a cornucopia of creative yumminess that we're going to get to experience as we come into the middle part of July in particular. So just know that the players are Pluto and Neptune and Uranus and Jupiter, and we're going to play with their gifting basket. And this energy of Chiron and Taurus, which will be active through this cycle, is part of this as well. This divine embodiment. Now, there was one other piece that I really wanted to talk about before we get to the solstice with regard to this Chiron movement into Taurus. And that is that the day it's happening here in the US, the 19th of June, is a holiday of independence. We have a storied history in the US of disempowerment and power over that is quite intense. Whether it's the indigenous people who lived here before the Europeans got here, or the Black people from Africa that the Europeans brought here, right? Juneteenth is a special, special day because it is the day that honors freed, the last holdout Texas, bringing the last slaves into legal freedom. Now, an invitation to feel the release from slavery. Now, did everything go to peaches and cream from that moment on? Of course not. Everything still is churning in those waters. Everything is still churning in those waters, not just here in America, where the current's gotten quite strong, but also throughout the world. And this is part of that splitting, right? But feel into Chiron making its first movement into the sign of divine embodiment, of creative manifestation, leaving for a window, anyways, the sign of empowerment, of I am. On the day when the last holdout of America, of legal slavery, disintegrated. Empowerment, divine embodiment, a rising up, a hallelujah, a freedom song. On the day that Chiron, we celebrate that here, on the day that Chiron shifts into Taurus. For my personal being, the holiday of Juneteenth speaks more to freedom and the ideal set forth in the Declaration of Independence than July 4th, the day that the United States as a whole has celebrated it. Because the moment in 1776 when that paper was signed, the only men that they were talking about were land-owning aristocratic white men. It took many, 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 many years before non-white men were included in that declaration, before females were included in that declaration. And we are still in the trial and error of that very much. But we're working on it. And this is part of what this movement also, it's an evolutionary, elevationary process. We are learning how to claim our power, claim our love, claim our divine birthright, and to feel that all of the life around us is not taking our power, our love, our birthright from us. It is through our claiming that we receive, through our acceptance that we receive. And as we accept, we realize there is absolutely no reason to try and exert power over another, for there's not really any power there to be claimed. This is where we're playing for the rest of this year as Chiron shifts through that liminal space between Taurus and Aries. Now on the 21st, on the 21st of June, 3 a.m. Pacific, the sun passes through the supernova of Betelgeuse and into the cardinal point, the 0 point of Cancer, the auspicious date that in the Northern Hemisphere we call the summer solstice. In the Southern Hemisphere, it would be the winter. It is either the longest day or the longest night, depending on where on this planet you are. This solstice happens to coincide with a maiden moon. The half moon in Libra will occur a few hours after almost exactly 12 hours actually after the solstice, with the sun still at 0 degrees of Cancer and the moon at 0 degrees of Libra, playing with that rebirthing energy. Now, the solstice is a time of rebirth. It is a time of rebirth, whether it is the winter or the summer. It is a movement through a threshold into an initiatory phase. During this entire cycle, Mars will be in a sextile to Mercury. Mars in Taurus, Mercury in Cancer. This is an exploration into expressions of belonging. Mars has been traveling in Taurus and will continue traveling in Taurus for a little while longer here. And we, through this, are getting a preview of Chiron's journey through Taurus, we could say. We are feeling that movement of the planet of drive and purpose, of I am, of rebirthing in many ways. Moving through this land of divine embodiment, of manifestation, of creation. In this Cancerian sextile with Mercury, Mercury in shadow of retrograde. Mercury will turn retrograde on the day of the Capricorn full moon, June 30th. June 29th, sorry. We are playing with how our expression of I am interacts and gifts belonging. Cancer, the sign of belonging. How through showing, through way showing as a way shower, a light worker, we hold our truest expression of I am in our divine embodiment, offering a portal, a threshold through which all of our family, the whole family, may pass through. Many of the aspects of this are bridge, holding the bridge. And we have heard a lot, we've talked a lot about the shifting and the two earths, the transformation, the timeline movements. This Mars Mercury experience. Now, a sextile is also a bridge. It's a bridge to a gift. What we're finding open in this bridge is a passage to allow more and 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 more souls to make the transit to the new earth. Now, it's pretty fun because all of the rest of June and the beginning part of July, as this Mercury retrograde starts, there is something called an enclosure happening. What is an enclosure? It is when two planets are sending their rays onto either side of another planet. In this case, it's Saturn in Aries and Mars in Taurus, and Mercury ping-ponging between them through its retrograde. We just had that square between Saturn and Mercury. Now we're in the sextile between Mars and Mercury. Mercury's going to shift backwards again, coming back towards that square with Saturn, and then forwards again, coming back towards that sextile with Mars. And remember, Saturn is our dharma, our purpose, our foundations. It's also our karma. And we remember karma and dharma are simply different expressions of the same energy. And as this ping-ponging occurs with Mercury and the sign of belonging, we are exploring the ways in which we can express ourselves more wholly, where we can come into a more unified state of belonging, where we can feel that divine embodiment. All throughout this, we find the nodes preparing to shift into Leo and Aquarius. The real shifting will begin to occur between July 26th and August 18th as the true and mean kind of wobble between. Magdalena is playing with the South Node during this time. A reclamation of voice, of seat at the table, of part of the story. Here we can feel, especially with all that Sedna energy as well, the rising of the divine feminine, the reclaiming of the feminine as part of the narrative, as part of the divine. On the day of the threshold crossing, on the day of the solstice, we also have Merlin retrograde in Aquarius, making an exact trine to Uranus. So we're really playing with the witch and the magi. We're really playing with that divine union, with that capacity within each and every one of us to embody wisdom and to express wisdom. The feminine within us, creative expression. The masculine within us, holding connection to all of it as well. Bringing more of our divinity into our bodily form. Receiving. Feeling how we are divine, y'all. At the moment of the solstice, remember 3 a.m. Pacific on the 21st, the moon will be passing through the end of Virgo and will make a trine to Mars, sextile to Mercury, which means Mercury will be sextile the moon. As this moment of threshold passing comes in, we are experiencing a gift of our divine expression, of a rising to the surface and healing of old unconscious, subconscious patterns. Remember, Chiron will already be at the 0 of Taurus. Over at the Blue Flame Apothecary, for this solstice event, I am holding a Trans-Liminal Mysteries transmission and activation circle. This will be community-wide, which means that if you are listening to this, you are invited. And you can just follow the link below, join the free community, and come and join us. The circle itself, the transmission circle itself, will begin at 10:30 a.m. Pacific on Sunday the 21st, and we're really going to be navigating the threshold as we activate more of our capacity to communicate through all the planes of our being, working with this energy as the moon ticks through the final degrees of Virgo on its ready to that maiden form at the 0 of Libra, helping us to step into the new, to initiate the new with access to all of our beingness and the capacity to communicate from the deepest depths of ourselves to the highest heights of ourselves and all of the places and planes in between, to communicate with our mitochondria, with the consciousnesses within all of the cells of our being, so that we can understand what the right food for any moment might be. We're talking about the food that we eat, as well as the food that we generate in our thoughts and in our hearts, in our communications. All of this is an invitation to feel how you are called to move through this threshold moment. If you're called to join the transmission activation circle, amazing. Now, if you're not available at 10:30 a.m. on that day and you want to attend, you still come over to Circle, join the community, that free atrium space, because a replay will be made available if that sings to your soul. Perhaps it's spending some time dancing in a field with the fairies that sings to your soul. Some sort of magic and ritual to help set the stage, all this masculine energy and all this feminine energy, to set the table, to allow for a Last Supper, perhaps, with those parts of you that are not making the transition. Feel in for yourself what is true. It is my personal desire that I see each and every one of you at that circle. And of course, if it's true. And with that, my friends, as always, in the always, so much and many loves to you from the dimensions of the all and beyond the beyond.